Recall to life. That's the cryptic message from Chapter 2 of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It was first used to refer to Dr. Manet, yet there are times when it can be applied to our classic British cars. We at Moss are frequently asked how to start an engine for the first time after it is sat unused for a while. That's a great question. Let's dig into this. A fundamental truth is automobile engines are not built to sit for long periods and then start. The oil in the galleries is drained out. The oil pump has lost its prime. The rings have stayed in one spot for so long they don't want to come back to service. Fuel in the carburetors is dried down to varnish. Fuel in the tank has lost much of its volatility. When a new engine is first assembled, all its contact points are coated with a product called assembly lube. Okay? It's an oil that's about as thick as honey, and that's put on all those moving parts. Okay? Now, when the motor first comes to life, those areas are lubricated where they need it. Then, when the engine oil is flowing, the assembly lube is dispersed throughout the engine oil. However, later, if that same engine is unused for an extended period of time, the oil will drain down to the pan. Then, when restarted or recalled to life, the first few moments of life will be with very little or perhaps no lubrication. Getting lubrication to those areas as soon as possible is the critical part of helping your engine when it's been recalled to life. Engines in our classic British cars that have been unused for extended periods can be put into two general categories. One is the car that was shut off and stored, perhaps for the winter. The engine's time without running is a couple of months. The other is the engine that has not been run for a longer period. A barn find is a classic example of one of those. A car that's off the road for winter should be on a battery maintenance charger. In the spring, you can remove the spark plugs, crank the engine with the starter until you see motor oil pressure beginning to show up on your gauge. This should take less than a minute. Cranking with no plugs lets the motor spin faster and will help prime the pump. Some people like to put a small amount of light oil in each cylinder before cranking. The idea is that the rings will have a little extra lubrication after being without oil for a while. A very small amount of light oil won't hurt anything, but be advised, the engine will smoke like a mosquito abatement project when it first comes to life. Make sure the spark plugs are clean and reinstall them. Start the engine. Try to keep the RPMs down until oil has been pumped to all areas of the motor. Let her come to operational temperature. Check your hoses in your belt. Double check your fluids. You're all set. Note: acids develop in motor oil when it's in use. Motor oil has additives to protect the surfaces inside your motor and to neutralize those acids. These additives break down with use. So if you put your car to bed for the winter with used oil in it, you aren't doing her any favors. A better way is to change the oil in the filter before shutting the car down for the winter. After changing the oil, run the motor long enough to make sure the fresh oil has been dispersed everywhere in the motor, then put it to bed. The engine that's sat for years is another matter. You should remove the spark plugs and put penetrating oil in each cylinder at least one full day before you try to address this engine. Personal opinion. It hurts this technician to hear of people who found a car that spent many years in a barn. A couple of guys tinker with it and then start it. Many people have done it. But dry parts will be operating in contact with each other for at least a number of seconds before any oil gets to them. People have told me, I've done it. I had no problems. The 400-pound gorilla in the room is in the form of a question. How much time will it take before the dry start damage that occurred will manifest itself? For example, a small scratch in a cam lobe will wipe out a cam. However, that won't become evident instantly. It may continue to work for many miles before the cam lobe goes flat. Damage to a crankshaft or connecting rod bearing will be similar. Piston rings can crack. It will take time for them to break and then chew up the cylinder wall, but it will happen. So the motor can be started, but mortally wounded in the process. Also, be aware. It's highly unlikely somebody took a car that was running well, parked it in a barn, and walked away. More often than not, that car had a problem. It was put in the barn until the problem could be addressed later. Later has arrived. Because it was left there for a reason, always treat a barn find as if you're looking for a problem, because you probably are. Opinion continued. If an engine has been sitting for years, the course of wisdom will be to disassemble this engine. Clean and inspect the parts, measure everything with critical tolerances, reassemble the engine with assembly lube or assembly paste, which is much like assembly lube, except it's more like toothpaste in its texture. You can put that on the cam lobes, put that on the bottoms of your flat tappets. Okay, now as she comes to life, she's going to have the lubrication that she needs. Okay, now then, we're going to flush the fuel lines. We're going to give her some fresh fuel. On the more common side, most people who contact us are talking about a car that's been unused for longer than a couple of months of winter, but less than a barn find. The original oil is probably very thin where it's needed. The motor isn't disassembled, so assembly lube or paste can't be used. Here are some suggestions. Remove the spark plugs and put a very small amount of penetrating oil into the cylinders for the rings. Note, some engines have dish pistons. If you randomly put some penetrating oil in the spark plug hole, that oil might land in the dish. That doesn't lubricate anything. Aim to squirt the oil at the cylinder wall. The oil squirt on the wall will run down the wall to the rings, and that's where we want it. Wait at least a few hours, then try to turn this motor by hand. Now, remove the fuel, discard it in an environmentally responsible fashion, and put in a couple of gallons of fresh fuel. Drain the coolant and put in a fresh supply of 50-50 mix. This will lubricate the water pump seal. Again, please be environmentally responsible with the old coolant. Install a fresh oil filter. If your filter installs at an angle that will allow it, fill the filter with fresh oil before installing it. Drain the motor. After the oil is out, put the drain plug back. At the port on the motor where the oil pressure sender is threaded in, remove the sender and put in a small hose with a small funnel. Put a few ounces of fresh oil into this port on the engine. This port usually goes to the oil pump. Getting a little oil into the pump will help it to prime. Now, remove the valve cover. Pour the rest of the new motor oil on the valve train, okay, on the rockers, on the rocker shaft, on the push rods. The oil in the push rods will run down to the lifters, spill over the lifters down to the cam lobes. Now the area that's usually last to get oil when the motor starts will have a head start. Put the valve cover back on. With your spark plug still out, turn the engine a few revolutions by hand. Turn it in the direction the engine is going to run in. It should feel smooth. With your spark plug still out and your battery fully charged, use the starter to crank the engine. Do this until oil comes out the hole where the sending unit was threaded in. Now we know we have the oil pump primed and she's pumping. Reinstall the sender. Start your engine. Keep the RPMs low for a few minutes and let the oil get everywhere. Congratulations, your motor has been recalled to life. Now, a bit of practical advice. The course of wisdom is to control your desire to immediately take a newly resuscitated motor and car out on the road. Of course, you're dying to drive it, and a couple of loops around the block is probably okay. However, we don't want to be out in traffic or at speed with this car. Rubber brake lines, tires, radiator hoses, and other such rubber products deteriorate with age. This is important. The fact that they have not been driven much does not mean they haven't aged. Fluid in your brakes and hydraulic clutch needs to be bled out and replaced with fresh fluid. Coolant should be drained and replaced. So whether your car has been sleeping through the winter or has been hidden in a barn for years, you can help it to be recalled to life.